You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra. How are you?
Good. How's it going?
Just another day in paradise, like we always say.
Yeah.
The fall is pretty much here, so...
Oh, I know. It is. I mean, this year has gone by so fast.
Yeah. It's starting to get chilly out there. Anyhow, today's subject is an interesting one. It is your habits and toxic mold exposure. So when we talk about habits, we've mentioned this before, but I think, you kind of brought up something the other day, and so we decided we're going to talk about this. You can't just get rid of like one part of the mold process, meaning like get rid of the mold infestations, but then you don't deal with mycotoxins, or you don't deal with your health or everything else. Like a lot of people think, well, we got rid of the mold, but we're not feeling any better, right?
Yeah, but habits take time to build. Habits also take time to change. And they lead to mold issues. The wrong habits do.
Yeah, and I think, part of it's the whole, you can't just address the mold infestation, but the other part of it is, I think a lot of people just assume that because they got rid of one thing, that everything else is just going to be fine. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of things that go into the equation.
Well, inputs versus outputs. I think people look at it like, we do mold remediation, and so the output should be that there's no more mold, right?
Yeah.
But there's lots of inputs that help mold grow.
Exactly.
Including people's habits.
Yeah. And, one of the habits that I think a lot of people have, I think we live in a world where we want a simple fix, and that's just not how it always works. But, like one of the probably most simple things that our listeners can do to prevent mold concerns is to buy a humidity gauge and just make a habit of checking it every day.
Absolutely. I mean, but then there are also the habits that people can stop participating in that actually, even with a humidity gauge, would contribute to mold growth.
Exactly.
So what do you think because I think people really love what I call passive habits, like buy humidity gauge, check it every day. It's very passive in that it's like you're hoping it tells you what you want to see. But what about the more active habits that people need to engage in to prevent mold growth?
Well, I think when it comes to a habit issue, it all depends. But, I think people that, maybe when they brush their teeth, they're just really messy. Or maybe when they do the dishes, they're really messy. Maybe they take a really long shower. Maybe they throw their wet towels in the corner. A lot of times, too, you have to deal with the children, too. in the home. That's usually in bathrooms. We always see issues with usually children. But to answer your question, yeah, you can't buy any humidity gauge isn't going to fix your bad habit.
No. And so what are some of the habits you notice people have with when it comes to their indoor air quality that in your mind you go, if they keep doing that, it's going to contribute to a mold problem long term?
There's several, but I don't know if I'd call this a habit. But, one of the biggest things I think that leads to mold growth is just a lack of maintenance on a home. Like, I can point out grading and drainage to someone and, maybe the husband tells the wife for years, yeah, I'll get to it. And then they never do. Mm-hmm. Another thing too is, and this is kind of a habit thing, but people just don't do routine inspections. You don't have to hire a professional.
Yeah.
Just, make it a routine to go check, if you have like a teenager that has a bedroom down in the basement and you never go down there, and then, I don't know, once a year you go down there and you find a bunch of plates because you ran out of plates upstairs and you're wondering where they're all at. You find out that you're there in your teenager's room. There are things like that as an adult that you can do that, might not be the easiest. I know we're all busy, but if you can make it a routine, I'm not saying go down there every day, but, to do things to make sure you're not missing something.
That's true. I think people miss things by not really taking a look at the cumulative impact of the things they do every day. Like people will think, oh, I wash the dishes super messy and there's water all over the countertop. And they go, that's not a big deal. I wipe it up. But how much is too much? How much leads to a mold problem? Or should people be OCD about it and never have anything like that happen?
Well, I don't think it's possible to never have any, moisture or standing water, but, something like being really messy when you're doing the dishes, like those types of problems that we see, and I'm sure our listeners understand this, you don't notice it till it's a big deal.
Exactly.
Like the backsplash looks fine for years, and then all of a sudden it starts pulling away, and you're like, oh crap, there's mold behind there. Well, once that's been going on for years,
that's a different thing.
You're literally having to tear out the kitchen cabinets and all that stuff. And so, I think for our listeners, the whole point of all of this is pay attention to your daily habits and pay attention to other people's. Mm-hmm. Which obviously can be a very touchy subject. But my point with that is one person in the home can affect everybody else's health because of their bad habits.
Absolutely. Like,
let's just say your teenager likes to have a steamy bathroom when they're showering and they never turn that fan on. Well, everybody else in the home, when there's a mold issue, is going, no, I shouldn't say everybody, but the entire home could be affected. Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
And it brings up something that's really interesting with mold exposure. A lot of times when you have a household, let's just say, it's a husband and wife and 3 kids. So there's 5 of you. When the cold is going around or COVID or whatever, usually everybody kind of gets it. The thing is with mold sickness is there could be 5 of you in that home and only one person's getting sick. And it's easy, as an outsider that's not the person that's sick to go, well, I doubt it's mold. Mm-hmm. And I want our listeners to understand that, we talk about this quite often, but there's 24 to 28% of the population that has a gene that they cannot detox mycotoxins like the rest of the people. Well, there could be 1 or 2 of those people in your home. There could be only 1.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we just overlook mold concerns because we don't see something obvious that's, maybe you have an uncle or dad or your husband or your son or your wife or anybody in the home. Maybe one of them's a contractor and they're like, well, I walked through the house and I didn't see any problems.
Yeah. And but you always say mold impacts each person differently.
Exactly.
Like you could have all those 5 people living in the same house, but one has the gene or one doesn't have the gene or one has something else that then is exacerbated by the mold.
Exactly. And it's, we see it all the time, when I do inspections or remediation. A lot of times it's only 1 or 2 people in the household that are getting sick. A lot of times it's only 1. But going back to my whole point is one person with a bad habit can affect the rest of the people in the home.
So what do people do about the bad habits? I mean, are there good habits that actually prevent mold?
Well, the good habits we already mentioned, buying humidity gauges, routine inspections, those would be good habits. Once again, you can buy all the humidity gauges in the world, but if you don't check them, if you don't follow up, you have the
Govee.
Yeah, the Govee that, it literally tells you, right? You set
and it also
alarm.
has an alarm that can alarm you if it goes above a certain humidity, which you set what that percentage is.
Right. How often do you check that?
Not that often. It
Exactly.
doesn't alarm me, but it's set to alarm me.
Right.
It's like a continuous glucose monitor if it goes super low.
But I guess my point is if you don't have the humidity gauges that alert you, you have to check those every day.
You do. I check the one in the fridge every day, our humidity gauge inside the fridge.
Right, but it's not there for humidity.
No, it's for temperature. But every day I look at that.
Our listeners are probably like, wait, what? Yeah, we have a fridge that's kind of temperamental, I guess, is
so
the best
we watch
way.
the temperature vigilantly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the point. You do have to be, to a certain extent, vigilant about watching your children's water usage behavior.
Yep.
Showering, bathing, when they take off their snow boots filled with snow on them, where do they put them? Where are they allowed to put them?
Right. And I think it brings up something else too that, we've talked about it, but we don't talk about it that often. But the education part and the awareness part, maybe your 14-year-old doesn't understand the negative health effects of mold. And so they think it's no big deal if they splash water all over when they're brushing their teeth.
Or they take a 3-hour shower.
Exactly. And, once again, when we talk about mold, a lot of times I say, we're doing this to ourselves. We have instant water heaters that you literally can shower for as long as your body can take it. Mm-hmm. And, once again, that's something, and it sounds, I'm sure our listeners are like, well, I'm not going to go in there and tell my husband or my wife or my child to get out of the shower. But on the other hand, that long shower, which is a habit, could turn into a $40,000, $50,000 mold remediation bill.
Correct.
And not just for mold remediation. Replacing furniture, doing whatever you have to do. And so like you said, you should go in there and check. Mm-hmm. We do that when we have young kids, when they're in a tub, but after they're old enough to not have to be checked on all the time, of course, as adults, we enjoy that part of it.
Yeah, but it's also checking the ventilation, and can the ventilation in that bathroom keep up with somebody taking a 3-hour shower?
Right.
Because if it can't, then either the showers have to go shorter or you need better ventilation to deal with a 3-hour shower.
Exactly. A lot of times, and I know it sounds terrible to say it this way, but a lot of times it's easier to correct or change that bad habit versus, trying to put better ventilation and doing all that.
Yeah, but I think also the teenager might not be aware that I would assume that if you have an instant water heater in a house and you could take a 3-hour shower, that the bathroom had been built to accommodate that. But as you point out many times, no, not necessarily. So I think teenagers might think, well, if I can do it, we have an instant water heater and I can sit in a shower for 3 hours, then obviously the bathroom is built to handle that, but no.
Right. And a lot of times, by the time that defect, I guess is what I would call it, by the time it metastasizes and actually rears its ugly head, sometimes that teenager's an adult and they've moved out.
Exactly.
So, it's just an interesting thing to talk about because a lot of times when we go in and do inspections, I have to ask the adults or my client who's the adult, how long does your 8-year-old or 9-year-old shower? Or what is your 7-year-old doing in this bathroom because this wall is really, really wet? Mm-hmm. And it's not uncommon for my clients to say, well, I don't know. And I think my point is with our listeners, you have to know what to be looking for. And if you don't have humidity gauges, that makes it very difficult. But it brings up something that's, for our listeners, after we're done with this episode, go into your bathrooms and just check the walls that are adjacent to the tub or the shower and make sure there's not a bunch of water damage.
Absolutely.
And you can see it. It'll be discolored. Sheetrock, when it gets wet, I don't want to say disintegrates because that sounds like it just disappears, but it gets really mushy and there's just no structural integrity to it. You can literally push your hand against the wall and go, oh, wow.
Yeah. Is that your call to action for people?
Yeah, I mean, that's something, I didn't have that in our notes, but, that's one thing that our listeners can do. And our listener is probably one person, obviously, in the household, not everybody. So, you can teach everybody else, whether it's your husband or wife, significant other, parents, children, you could teach them, hey, you can't keep doing this because this is going to cost us a lot of money.
Mm-hmm. No, totally agree.
And we have, as we talked about before, we have plenty of digital bundles on the website.
Yeah, lots.
I mean, we have the Mold 101, and then we have the
mycotoxin prevention kit.
That's right.
Yeah, and more will be coming. So it's important to go to cnccontractorservices.com and check them out.
Yep, perfect. Well, I appreciate all you listeners, and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also, on cnccontractorservices.com, find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.